I've always been one to jump across domains, and I realized that and this is really where it came to light, is that what is learned here is that if it is a foundational principle, it will work in any domain 100% of the time. I always thought that to be true. Now I know that to be so because I've seen it actually be broken down from a process standpoint and then being able to actually implement it myself.
Here's the big question. Are you ready to reach new limits?
Welcome back, everyone, to Rigging the Game. I've got my mentor again, Randy Massengale, here. And today we're going to talk to Jeff Merck about how he's learned to play his game. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Now, Jeff, I feel like you and I are kindred spirits, mostly because we have shared PTSD from working in Big Four consulting accounting.
This is true.
But tell a little bit about your story.
Yeah, so I actually came up through, I was Air Force early on, and I came up through the ranks as a technologist working for one of the Big Four, and eventually pushed on the top of tech and then got into senior management, and eventually sales looked like a more fun path. So I don't know, glutton for punishment or just wanted a different experience. That was kind of the track. But I learned a lot working for the Big Four, and that served me well just throughout my career.
So we see you right now, nicely cut, shaped hair, appropriate length, got a corporate job, but you weren't always like that. You used to be a renegade with some long hair.
I was.
Rule breaker. What happened?
So, I went in the Air Force and they got rid of that, right? But prior to that, people typically referred to my hair as either glorious or epic, and so I had really good hair, and it was like totally white back then and very long, and so yeah, it was a lot of fun. And it was in the 80s, so I fit right in, kind of a rocker and all that good stuff. So,
well, rest in peace to the rocker hair, I guess.
Yeah, pretty much. It is long gone, but I do have a lot of fun showing that picture sometimes because I actually showed it earlier today, and somebody was like, "Wow!" Like, I know, right?
So you've gone through our program. You've learned about playing your game. Share a little bit about your journey, and I'm going to let Randy jump in here too.
Yeah. So in terms of the program, to me, I sum it up when people ask me about it like this. If you take what I've learned in the past year and look at that juxtaposed to the last 20 years, I've learned more in the last 1 year that has been actually useful than I have in the last 20. And I'm a deep learner on things, but I think that it's how things actually work as opposed to like, hey, do it this way. Because it's just a different path in what I've learned here, and it's been epically helpful to me.
You use some really important language, and I want to connect it back to something that we study, which is called teaching smart people how to learn. And there's useful, and then there's valid. Randy, do you want to talk about useful versus valid information?
Well, the thing that people seem to gravitate toward is to try and make validity out of everything, making sure that whatever you say is the most accurate or is the most factual or something along those lines. But they never talk about whether it actually works, okay? And what you find when you come to work with us is that we teach what works, okay? And so, and if it works, and this has come over years and years, if it works, Jeff, it works for everything. Yes. It shouldn't work 25, 30%, 75%. You should be able to deploy it anywhere under those circumstances, and it works. Have you found that to be the case?
I have found that to be the case. So I've always been one to jump across domains, and I realized that and this is really where it came to light, is that what is learned here is that if it is a foundational principle, it will work in any domain 100% of the time. I always thought that to be true. Now I know that to be so because I've seen it actually be broken down from a process standpoint and then being able to actually implement it myself.
Well, it's interesting because almost 30 years ago when I decided I was a director at Microsoft and I wanted an advanced degree. And so I went back to school and got a master's degree in management. And the reason why I went back to school is because I wanted to develop universal principles that could help anyone in any discipline move forward. And I would say that to people because I'd never heard it anywhere, and they'd go, well, how do you do that? I said, that's why I'm going to school, okay? We'll learn how to do it. But I found that there are several universal principles that apply across the board that can be customized for individual circumstances and still be even more valid once they're customized, but still have a baseline of validity that will at least get you to the 90th percentile, maybe, in the upper 10 percentile. And so that's what we try to teach. And it seems to be working, so I appreciate that. Tell me about something, though. You have young children, you have young child, you have older children.
Yeah, I'm a master family planner.
Okay.
29, 27, and 4.
And 4. So what are you doing differently with the 4-year-old that you didn't do with the 29, 27-year-old?
Well, just for starters, when you have kids in your early 20s, you think you know what you're doing, but you don't know what you're doing. When you have younger kids at my age, which I'm over 50, you actually realize that you don't know as much as you thought you knew, but you get the opportunity to actually impart actual wisdom as you do this. And it's just a totally different dynamic because now I'm very slow to act on things, and I watch and observe, and I find humor in most of it because you actually get to see that I've learned probably more from him than he learns from me, and it was totally opposite when I was doing this at a younger age. So so it's really fascinating to me to get to do that over again with having a lot more wisdom because you just are a better father when you have that more wisdom under your belt. There's no two ways about it.
Do you think the principles from what we've been teaching have helped you in that area?
Significantly so, because I'll give you an example. My favorite principle is actually closer over more. And because I realized when I first was introduced to that, I'm like, I've been chasing more my whole life. And that's what's wrecked a lot of things that I thought should have been successful that weren't. And when I realized that, I just really took pause, and that one kind of put me back on my heels, and I took really good account of where all do I see that, and then how do I actually change that from pursuing more to actually closer. And so one real world example was my little guy was actually crying about something one day, and I said, is crying actually getting you closer to what you want? And he said, no. And I said, how do we get closer? And he kind of looked at me and I said, we use our words. Tell me exactly what you need and we'll get there. He chilled out, he stopped crying, he told me what he needed, I got it. World was all better, right? So that was a real world implementation of closer over more with the little guy.
See, I think kids can actually condense the lesson and absorb it faster.
Much more so than us adults. There's no two ways about that.
That's for sure.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about playing your game. When you started down this process about a year ago, would you say that you knew what your game was at that point? You knew kind of what your unique strengths, gifts, etc. were?
Not at all. For me, I've always felt out of place to a great degree, that most people around me, they didn't see what I saw. They didn't seem to have the same experience. I even joked one time when I was younger, I was like, maybe I'm an alien, and I'll realize that at some point.
But we still can't rule that out.
This is true. But I did not know, but coming into this and actually, especially the first part of the program, helped me to actually slow down, take a step back, and really take an objective look. And I realized I've been looking for my game the whole time out there, and that really is, there was an inward focus on that for a while, and I did actually was able to determine what my game was not. And then it's been a journey for me to step into what playing my game actually looks like. So.
Yeah, that's a process, isn't it?
It is a process.
Go through that. Right. I think finding out what is not your game is as important as playing your game, especially initially. I think too many people go out and say, I'm going to try this, try that, and err on a whirlwind versus all right, I did this for a period of 6 to 8 weeks, 3 months, whatever it is, and I realize that's not my game, but I still have enthusiasm for my game.
Right.
I still want to find what it is I can do.
Now, Randy, you and I have been working together for 15 years or so, something like that. It might have taken me the first 12 to figure out what my game wasn't. So just permission to everyone else out there in the world. This is a process, and sometimes you think you have it figured out, and then you realize you were wrong, and that's okay too.
Yeah, and I'll say even today, just in some of the discussions we had earlier, it gets clearer and clearer every time we have interactions, because you just continue to lean into the process and the program, and that stuff just starts becoming more and more crystallized. And it's been a fascinating process for me to actually watch and see, how that's progressed, and I've really enjoyed it.
Why would you say playing your game is important to you?
So coming up through military and then working for one of the big fours and just kind of being the good corporate, kid, so to speak, I've always had this thing of like, hey, here's a better way to do this. And usually it's like, you think too much. That's too logical. Let's don't do that. And so for me, being able to step into playing my game and realizing that that's actually what I'm supposed to be doing, and it's almost like getting permission that it's okay to do that. And so for me, when I realized that, it was this switch for me where I'm like, oh, well, all these things I've thought to be so actually are. I can really trust what I thought to be right, because it is. And then I'm able to move in the world, let people feel the weight of who I really am in terms of what I bring to the table. And if it resonates, it works. And if it doesn't, just move on with it. But at least I'm doing a lot more of what's authentic and that part of playing my game that actually is getting me closer to what I actually want, and doing the same in turn for the people I interact with.
Yeah, what strikes me is that every iteration that you go through with playing your game is when you start to get the hang of it, then it's a shorter cycle for each one of those phases. And so before, when it took you 12 years to play your game, now it takes you 12 days, okay? And I may be exaggerating, but I don't know. If I don't talk to you in 12 days, you will have decided that you've got a new game, and your game is in full swing, and I have to run full speed to catch up with where your game is. So it may be something to this 12 years to 12 days.
Well, I think so much of this process is acceptance and forgiveness. Acceptance of frankly, who you are.
Right.
And then forgiveness to the rest of the world for not accepting you for who you are.
Very true. Yeah, and I think realizing that was an epic relief for me, because I remember we were having a conversation at one point, and it was almost like you looked at me and said, you do have permission to actually do that, right? Which I didn't technically need permission from you, but it was like just hearing that was like, oh yeah, and it was that realization of like, okay, and that there's so much that shifts within you and just in general across the board once you realize that. And it almost sounds silly that we're like, but we're conditioned to say, hey, you're supposed to do it this way, you're supposed to do it that way. And it's always felt against the grain to me. So knowing that it's not against the grain, and I am doing it the way that is the way that actually brings the most goodness, not just to me, but humanity in general, and the way that I interact in the world. I think that there's this huge relief off that,
Well, you can imagine after he's played somebody else's game for 20 years in the military and 4 or 5 years in big accounting firms, and maybe even something after that, how much conditioning goes into making sure you're playing somebody else's game and playing it well. You've got performance reviews and other things that kind of reinforce that. And pretty soon you've forgotten what your game is.
Yeah, because I can tell you on the when it comes to performance reviews, like I was with the firm for a long time, and if you never wanted to get meets expectations, it was always, exceeds or highly exceeds. And my target was always, I wanted to be in the top 5%. And that was extremely hard to get. And and the same thing when I was in the military. I won a lot of awards and got a lot of accolades, but getting in that very top, single digit percentage was always hard because of competition. And I remember one time I had this commander that, I had this one guy outpace me for one award, and he leaned over and he said, "Hey, don't feel bad about it. That guy brought in a B-1B on bingo fuel, and he was about to crash this multi-million-dollar airplane if he did it on the ground." And he said, "And you did some cool stuff, but it wasn't that." So, it was one of those things, right? But again, still being in that top echelon, that was always the target. Because if you didn't get there and outpace your peers, you just didn't make it in that world. So, but it was playing their game their way, not my game my way.
Right.
Yeah, there's so much understanding around. There's such a process of understanding that people, processes, systems, organizations, they're going to disappoint you, and that doesn't mean anything about you.
Correct.
It's oftentimes someone does something so disappointing, and you're like, what is it about me that caused this to happen?
Yeah.
And sort of that forgiveness again and acceptance that you have to look, I'm just different than everyone else, which means I have a higher probability of other people disappointing me.
Yeah, and that's true. And a lot of times in the corporate world, there's a lot of structure, there's a lot of bloat, there's a lot of wasted resources, and I do see things differently. And and I ask the question, why are we doing it this way again? And you always try to bring value and better process and stuff like that. But it is a construct that you get back to that thing. Play stupid games, you get stupid prizes, right? But again, at some point, you have to say, hey, let's make these changes and have better outcomes. And when that's listened to, it's really a good thing. But it's harder in the big organizations because it's like trying to steer the Titanic versus a speedboat.
Well, I think we should leave it with this sort of final takeaway of what I've heard from you,
Sure.
Which is that, look, most institutions, most systems, etc., they don't have allowances for you being different.
Correct.
They need you to conform. That's how the system is built. Education, corporate America, etc. It's too difficult to have a large group of people all behaving differently. So they need you to conform.
Correct.
In other words, they need you to play your game. And so if you want to do something extraordinary, you're not going to do it in that environment. You got to get out of it, or at least give yourself permission to be who you are.
If I can make an amendment to that, they want you to play their game.
Yes.
Okay? Use your skills and play their game. And that's, you go home schizophrenic, and you wonder why you're yelling at your kids and your spouse or loved ones and things like that. Well, you've just spent 8 hours doing it the way that they would do it when you wouldn't have done it that way. Okay? And so I thank you for coming on,
Sure.
Okay? And I wish you all the best with your quest to make sure you are more like yourself than you are today.
Yeah, much appreciated, because it is, to your point, it does lead to frustration when you spend, of course, working for the Big Four, this, 8 hours a day is like half a day. And so you spend a lot of time playing their game, but when you do make the shift to play your game, there's a lot of relief in that, and a lot more fulfillment, a lot more contentment, all those good things. So thank you guys enormously for being able to work together. It has literally made a massive difference in life, and I couldn't be more thankful for it. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks for coming.
Sure.
Thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
Here's the big question. Are you ready to reach new limits? It's time to change your family tree and redefine industry. Enough with all the cliche cookie cutter recommendations about finance, business, and life. You found the podcast to give you the tips you need to create the unconventional lifestyle and outcomes you've always wanted. It's time to build your own systems and play your own game. You're tapped in with the one and only Dan Nicholson, and this is Rigging the Game Podcast.